Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.
This is Breakthrough News, and I am, of course, one of your hosts here on the Freedom Side, which you are watching here on our YouTube page. I should have said my name, Eugene Rania, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, as always, great to be back with you.
Good to be back on with you, Eugene.
Of course, and we've got plenty for you here today on the show. We want to just get ready to jump right into it in a second. We've got a few guests who are already waiting, but just very quickly want to remind you, since you are watching here on YouTube, to go ahead and hit subscribe so that you can be subscribed to all the great content we have, including Dispatches with Rania Khalek. A great one, by the way, will be dropping right at the end of this show, but we'll get into that right after that. But of course, make sure you hit the bell so you can get the alerts about the things that you have subscribed to so that you can find us. We'll try to find some other time here in the show to make some other announcements, but don't forget you can make a donation right under the screen here today. But why don't we just go ahead and get into it here, Rania? I want to just move forward with the show. There are many things we're discussing. First, we want to turn to the subcontinent here, India, and some of the very interesting things that have been happening there as it concerns the mass movements of students, workers, and peasants. So we are very, very honored to be joined here as we continue the show by Aisha Ghosh, who's an activist with the Students' Federation of India and also the president of the Students' Union at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Aisha, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, really an honor to have you here. And I think the proximate issue that was making me want to take up some of these points here was the recent Insaf brigade that we saw in the state of Bengal. I mean, huge seas of people. I don't even know how many people. Maybe you can tell us. It seems certainly like hundreds of thousands of people coming out. And so I was hoping you could say a little bit more about what led to this event and what were some of the issues at stake that led to people to come from hundreds of kilometers away to be a part of this gathering.
Yeah, so in Bengal, in the past more than 10 years, we have been seeing our right-wing government at the state level of Bengal. And because of it, we have been seeing consecutively that people's issues are getting sidelined. And the context of jobs for youth or education, which is education for all among these students, basic questions of the workers, peasants, and are somewhere not being in the center stage of the state. Huge corruption has been levied against the state government at this present, which is been ruling Bengal. And that is what has been the primary question in the last few years, that the Insaf Yatra, like the rally which we saw, it was for more than 50 days, led by the youth, left student and youth organizations. And it covered more than 3,000 kilometers across the state of Bengal, reaching out to the common youth, students and citizens of Bengal on the pertinent issues of livelihood, the grappling issue of corruption that is eating up the state of Bengal at this moment, and issues of job, employment, which are becoming the core issues among the youth at this point of time. We saw a huge response from the people. People came out in thousands in a very positive response that exactly what people want is not being spoken by the ruling dispensation at this moment. And that is why they want to reach out to the left youth and student organizations so that they can represent the people's aspiration at this moment. And on the day of the brigade, which was the 7th of January in the capital of the state, which is Kolkata, we saw more than 7 lakh people who joined the brigade in demand for justice, insaf, which means justice. And people in Bengal, the youth, the students, the workers, every corner of the parts in Bengal, every corner of the people are asking for justice. and justice for the basic minimum needs that they have not been getting.
And can you maybe elaborate a bit on some of the specific demands that people are asking for when you talk about those minimum needs?
Yeah, surely. That one of the serious issues that we have seen in the past few years is the corruption charges that the ministers at this moment at the ruling dispensation are having. Whether it's the education minister in Bengal, he has been in jail for months now, and several other ministers who have been holding important portfolios in Bengal in the ruling dispensation at this moment have been under the behind the bar because of corruption charges. We have seen over the years that several exams, several employment jobs have been given to people. People have been bribed for huge amount of money to get those employment opportunities, and people who had merit for it, people who deserved the rightful choice of employment, have been not been given those choices. Not only this, but how the condition of the administration at this moment and the system within the state is that basic, even for the basic need of livelihood, even for basic industrialization, even for basic job opportunities, people are having to give lakhs of people are being asked lakhs of monies that if you want to seek a job in this state, if you want something from here, you need to bribe people who are there in the system. So this kind of system is something that people are talking against, because people who deserve those positions, people who want have educational backgrounds, are actually not getting rightful rights of getting jobs. Also, education is a huge factor at this moment. If we see, students have been continuously demanding access to better facilities, better quality of education. We have been seeing huge migration in the past few years from Bengal to other states within the Indian state, within the country, because they are not getting quality jobs inside the state. They are migrating to other parts of the country. They're migrating abroad or to other countries just because of getting quality education, or just because they want quality work culture or basic work needs. There is no minimum wage given to the workers at this moment. People are not talking about, the government at this moment is not talking about minimum wages, and it's quite lower than the average minimum wage, which is there in many parts of the country. So that all these things have been a huge thing, and that is why people, and the youth especially, is asking for justice, because they don't want a state which has always stood for inclusivity, a state which has always stood for the rights of the people. At this moment, the youth, especially the youth, the students, and the people from different parts of Bengal feel that they are not getting justice. They are not getting their basic livelihood questions are not getting addressed.
You know, would you put what took place in Bengal recently in a broader context of something I think we've been seeing, over the past couple years? I mean, obviously we saw the farmers' protests that not only shook India but shook the whole world. One of the world's largest, if not India's largest, workers' rallies. I believe that was last year that took place. Now we're seeing, especially the youth, rising up in Bengal, a key state of India. I mean, would you sort of put this into maybe one stream of perhaps a rising tide of resistance to the sort of hyper-capitalist agendas at many of the regional and national government levels?
Yeah, post 1991, we have seen a shift in the economic policies in India. As we have seen globally, it has also affected India. And of course, with the right wing shift in the government, direct shift of power, where we have seen the far right political organization, political parties are now into the government. We have seen the economic policies, the capital, the corporate nexus have been increasing on an everyday basis. And as the corporate nexus has been increasing, we are seeing that people's questions somewhere, the need of the people, the rights of the people, the democratic questions of the people, or the livelihoods of the people, are somewhere taking a backstage. And hence, we have seen the largest number of movements in the past few years. When we talk about the kind of labor codes that have been passed in the Indian parliament, if we see, there have been codes which the workers across India are protesting. When we saw the farmers' agitation, we saw the kind of policies, anti-farmer policies that the present dispensation ruling government tried to bring in, were something which is going to give away a lot of take away a lot of rights from the farmers and give away a lot to the corporates. And we have been continuously seeing this happening in every field, that day by day we are seeing that the working class population inside our country, the people who have been putting out labor day in and day out, their rights are continuously getting scuttled. And especially during the pandemic and post the pandemic, we have been seeing that how the corporates have benefited from these situations, and the condition of the workers, the farmers, the peasants have worsened in these times. And there has been no policy which is there from the behalf of the government to support and facilitate these people, the farmers, the workers, or the student or the youth at this moment, whether it is financially, whether it is a systemic way of supporting them. We have seen huge reduction in scholarships for the students. We have seen huge, like India has seen one of the highest percentage of unemployment rate in these after its independence. So this is because of the economic condition. This is because of the policies at this moment that the government, the far right governments have been taking, and the corporate nexus which is directly linked into this.
And then can you also on the other side of that talk about, under this current right-wing government that you have in India, what is the response looking like towards these current protests, given what we've seen in the recent past? I imagine that it hasn't been pleasant, the response.
Of course, like as we see that there has been rise in anti-people policies, we have seen resistance also. It's not that we have not seen resistance. We have seen mass movements. It have been quite hopeful that the farmers, the peasants, the workers have been fighting on an everyday basis to take their agenda and to make people understand that what the farmers are fighting today is not only their agenda, but also for everyone. But as much as we see that resistance is happening, as much as we see that people are taking up their agendas and building movements, mass movements, we also see that there is crackdown on these voices. Recently, we see our parliament has suspended more than 140 member of parliaments from the opposition. It's like cutting down all the voices of the opposition, or also cutting down people's direct voices, because we do elect our member of parliaments and send them to the parliament to represent our voices. So suspending them from parliament means suspending people's voices from the parliament, is people's issue from the parliament. But this has been happening. We recently saw in the past few years the continuous arrests of people, citizens, students, youth who are speaking from the democratic movements, who are talking about the policies which are being taken against the people. And we also saw that several sedition charges and several other charges which has been levied against these students, youth, or farmers many times, or people who are protesting against the policies which the democratic movement or the mass movements have felt that does not suit the interest of the community. So these kind of crackdown are continuously happening. There are there are citizens of our country who are behind the bars for more than 1,000 days for now, just because of voicing their dissent, and they have been put behind the bars just because they were not siding with the present ruling dispensation, or they were not agreeing to the policies that this current government was trying to impose, and they had a differentiated opinion of how the country should be looking towards the minorities in this country, or how the government should be looking towards its own citizens of this country. We have been seeing a huge crackdown also at the same time.
And briefly, before we let you go here, obviously talking about this huge demonstration we just recently saw and thinking about momentum, should we expect more demonstrations, strikes, and forms of resistance in Bengal or elsewhere moving forward into the coming weeks?
As we sit here, according to Indian time, it's night, almost 2:00. In the morning, we are having a huge protest rally at the national capital of our country, which is New Delhi. We are having a students' rally, which is specifically to highlight the education policies at this moment, the anti-student policies that has been taken by the current ruling dispensation. More than thousands of students across the states are going to participate. More than 16 student organizations are participating in this rally tomorrow morning at Delhi's Jantar Mantar. And students are coming out to voice their opinion that we want an inclusive education, we want quality, accessible education, and education for all. And the kind of privatization of education, which is rampantly increasing in Indian spaces, we are seeing that public education has been diminished on an everyday basis. People coming from the most marginalized section in India are not getting access to basic fair education, free and fair education. So these are the issues we are talking. Employment is one of the important issues. Women's safety has become a very, very big concern in educational and campus spaces, where we don't have committees to look around sexual harassment and related issues of student community like scholarship, the reduction of funds in education sector. We are going to have a huge rally, and in the coming days, of course, because if such kind of anti-student, anti-youth, anti-people's policies are continuously being taken, decisions are being taken by this government, we are bound to see resistance also coming from the people, because people are tired of these kind of anti-people's agenda. People want their agendas to be in the forefront. Students do want, youth wants, farmers, workers, everyone wants that people should talk about their livelihood. People should talk about their, like, the agendas of the people, rather than only satisfying the needs of the corporate at this moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, we really appreciate you coming and helping us sort through all of this very important issues in India, very important country. Aisha Ghosh, who is an activist with the Students' Federation of India and president of the Students' Union at JNU. Thank you so much for staying up late and giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side. Rania?
Well, Eugene, it's good to see people standing up and you know, demanding things collectively, which,
yes,
you know, we're all around the world. And I'm glad that we get to cover that sort of thing here at Breakthrough News. And it's not something that we got to say in the beginning, but that's my segue into.
Well, briefly before you say anything, I just want to note that someone has donated $1,000. I think Z Score O is how you say that screen name. Either way, however you say it, shout out to you for $1,000 donation.
Thank you.
Big thanks.
Thank you. That's incredible. And for those of you who also want to help support Breakthrough, you can go to patreon.com/breakthrough news and become a member. And you can access exclusive content such as various parts of my show dispatches, as well as Eugene's monthly seminar on Africa and all kinds of other cool merch. Eugene might have one of them on him. Do you? I didn't check first. I just assume you have the mug. Oh, always. You've always got the mug. Yes. Look at that beautiful mug. So yeah, I do encourage you, if you support, you know, if you appreciate independent media and you support the work we do here at Breakthrough, it does depend on your support. So please become a member of Breakthrough News. And thank you, huge thank you to the person who donated.
Yeah, that's big. Wow, and shout out to Aisha Ghosh, our last guest, for staying up until 2 a.m. Well, we have another guest on the line, also stayed up late for us. So I have to say we're very honored to have coming to us from the occupied West Bank as we turn our attention back to Palestine. We are really, really honored to have with us Anan Quzmar, who's a volunteer with the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate. Anan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, it's an honor to have you here. You know, I think some people, or almost everyone, have seen that journalists have been increasingly, significantly targeted in Palestine in the post-October 7th era. So, you know, as we started, I was hoping you could just say something about what the impact and the toll has been on Palestinian journalists during this conflict.
It has been devastating. We have seen nothing like this before, and I think the world has never seen anything like this before. Over the last 3 months, the Israeli military campaign has carried out a calculated assassination campaign against our journalists. They were targeted and killed one by one, almost on a rate of one per day. Up to a few days ago, it was the total was 109. Our investigations show that out of the 109, there is at least 96 who were specifically targeted, including 22 in the line of duty, and the rest were targeted in strikes that specifically hit their houses and killed them, sometimes many times along with their family members. Many journalists also have had threats, and following these threats, their family members were targeted and attacked and killed. We have injured journalists who are in needing of urgent medical care that is not available to them at the moment in Gaza because Israel destroyed the health system, and they are not allowed to seek the needed healthcare outside the borders of Gaza because of Israel's blockade. So it has been totally devastating. Rest of our journalists who are still continuing to work, they are having to make unimaginable choices and decisions every day, while they are rightly recognized as a potential target for Israeli attacks at any moment, including choosing basically who to kill alongside you or to be killed alongside, really, what house to stay in and so on. So it's no different to what Palestinians are experiencing under this Israeli military campaign. And one thing that stands out for our journalists that they're working as hard as you can and putting their lives on the line in order to bring an end to this.
You know, you're talking to us from the West Bank, and obviously the scale of destruction and of targeted killings in Gaza is so much higher than what we're seeing in the West Bank. And as a result, what's happening in the West Bank has gotten far less attention. But it's nonetheless, it's quite horrific what we're seeing in the West Bank as well. Could you talk a bit about what the Israeli occupying forces have been doing in the West Bank over the last couple of months in terms of targeting certain towns and cities quite aggressively in what looks like war? I mean, it looks like war, what we're seeing in the West Bank, as well as, you know, I know they've been targeting certain kinds of infrastructure. I imagine, though I'm not sure, but I imagine they've also been targeting media as well. But can you talk a bit about what's taking place in the West Bank?
Yes. What has been happening in the West Bank has started long ago, well before the last 3 months. I live in Tulkarem. I was waiting patiently for my turn to come on because I don't know how long the electricity will stay with us, because I live next to Tulkarem refugee camp, and my brother just walked in and said that the army is in the city. So this is the start of another incursion. These incursions were regular and frequent before October 7th and have become more regular, but have become a lot more aggressive. There is clearly a softening, as the Israeli media calls it, of rules of engagement, which allows the Israeli army to carry out practices exactly like you're showing in on the screen of collective punishment, where the bulldozers just drive into refugee camps, paving way, destroying people's homes and shops. And one of the most consistent patterns in the city of Tulkarem, where I live now, is the destruction to infrastructure, particularly water and electricity, which is a form of collective punishment. This is their way of cutting water and electricity from the local population in the areas where they are operating. But not only this, we see signs of almost military practice in these cities, where they come in, they practice withholding a whole city under curfew for extended periods of time that are getting longer and longer, totally aimlessly and pointlessly. They control certain areas where the soldiers will go from house to house, get all the men out, carry out what they call field investigations or interrogations, mostly using violence. Most of those who are interrogated are released soon after in the same local area where they're picked up from their homes, and many will be transferred out of the city only to be released right at the border at the crossing. In the last two incursions, vast majority of all who were arrested like I said, were released either in the same moment or like within hours, or were taken to different locations in the West Bank. Last time it was the crossing west of Tulkarem, the one before that in Hawara. Both times, those who were released had severe injuries as a result of interrogations, these so-called field interrogations. And the last incursions which took place 3 days ago started with an undercover Israeli force that killed 3 Palestinian youngsters between the age of 22 and 24. The Israeli army had prevented the medical teams from reaching them and released a statement before even the medical teams could reach the bodies, saying that they had eliminated 3 so-called terrorists and that an exchange of fire took place. Within less than half an hour, CCTV camera footage, which, by the way, prior to October 7th, the Israeli army would have gone into the house and confiscated the footage. This is a well-documented practice of taking away camera footage. But it seems the new rules of engagement allows not only for murdering youngsters, but also for neglecting even to destroy the evidence, because who cares? We can just call them terrorists and release pictures of guns supposedly confiscated in the area. Their claim actually was pretty specific, which is that an exchange of fire took place. And this is not uncommon in terms of fabrication. This, I think, is on the media, the way that the media allows Israel to release fabricated evidence, don't check it, and release it as claims. Before I went on air, I closed the window so that you don't actually hear the army. Usually I'm filming from right this window as the jeeps are driving towards Nur Shams. From my location, I can tell that they're heading towards Nur Shams refugee camp right now. So I was talking about the media bias and how it allows the Israeli military to get away with this sort of merciless murder. There is another footage, by the way, from the other side, which shows the soldiers were basically waiting for the kids to try and run out from that door and shot them. So in the recent case, to go back to the issue of journalists, in the recent case of Hamza Dahdouh and Mustafa Abu Traya, you may have seen that 2 days after their murder, Israel released a statement as a series of tweets in 3 languages with the Arabic and Hebrew, including more garbage than the English version. The tweet included a document that was completely fabricated. It had the date and the day mixed up. The language is laughable and absurd. And to just give you a glimpse of like also the situation here, it would be actually difficult for me as a journalist to contact a lecturer at a local university and say, can you give me a statement about this being really a made-up story? You know, they will straight away, when they see this document, they will see the fabrication and they will laugh it off. But they will not want to be publicly seen making statements that dismiss such fabrications. And this fabrication also is based on claims that they had found documents in Gaza during the invasion. But these fabricated documents, even they only shared one, but these fabricated claims are about well-known figures, you know. So, and the media fails to check. The media not only fails to check, these people work for well-established organizations. For example, Hamza is one of the most skilled media drone operators in Gaza. His commissioned work for AFP, Al Jazeera over the last 3 years has been providing materials for Al Jazeera showing the level of destruction. And this is why he was targeted. And by sharing this statement, it shows the level of impunity, not only from international organizations such as the UN and human rights organizations, and so, but it also shows the level of complicity of the media, that Israel can release such fabrications, and it is within, you know, their knowledge that this person is actually an actual journalist. still carry these lies.
You know, it really is honestly sometimes amazing, and I guess, you know, because of social media this time around, especially those of us in the United States where the media is so biased, as you point out, are able to see, you know, without filter, without mediation, the actual Palestinian story. I mean, of course, you know, I wish none of this was happening in the sense of what we've seen in this genocide, but does it feel to you, at the very least, because of social media, that maybe more now than in past conflicts, the Palestinian voice is able to break through in a popular way without some of these gatekeepers, despite the fact that obviously they're still there and still continuing to report poorly?
I wish I could say yes, to be honest with you. I think, obviously, a lot of our supporters and many Palestinians live in a world where we are the media war completely and so on. I wish that was true. But you find in reality that even social media companies are censoring Palestinian voices. And in this reality where there is high level of interest and little room for speech for us Palestinians, wherever we are, you find the perfect scenario for a lot of grifters, accounts that don't really care about what happens to Palestinians, as long as on the short term they can make some sort of a gain, whether it's financial, whether it's clout, or whatever it may be. I think it's important to remind all the people who have been part of this struggle for a long time and have a more nuanced understanding of the situation, that we have a lot of new supporters that are coming in, and this puts a responsibility on us to reach out to them and provide information, protect them from falling victim to, you know, the wrong type of account. I'm not. I call myself an optimist. I see obviously the bright side of the exposure of Israel's genocidal campaign and its true face to a much wider layer in the global world. It's important, but if we can't turn this into effective action, this is just going to be noise. And as soon as there is a ceasefire, the people of Gaza will not find the much needed support that they will continue to need, and Palestinians in general.
Well, we really appreciate you being willing to join us here and help shed some light on all of this. Anan Quzmar, a volunteer with the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate based in the occupied West Bank. Thanks for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Rania?
Wow. I mean, it's just gets worse and worse. And it's like, I don't know. It just, when does it end? Like, when does it end? It's just nonstop. Israel's destructive capacity is nonstop.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have anything else to add other than that.
No, well, that's what else can you say? I mean, it's one of these things where it's the words to really describe what's happening aren't fully there, I think, in our language. Shout out to Z Scoro as well. I see you donated again. Really appreciate your generosity there. But no, I think you're very right about that, Rania, and we'll talk a little bit more about this so-called new phase and what that means in this Israeli genocide. Rania and I will towards the end of the show. But now we want to turn to another major front of the struggle, and that is U.S. academia, where there is a significant attack on anything pro-Palestine, and there's an attack on people who aren't even pro-Palestine because they're deemed to not be, you know, whatever, pro-genocide enough. And obviously Harvard University has been ground zero in that conversation. And we are very, very happy to be joined here on the show once again by Amari, Butler, and Kojo Acheampong. Sorry, I got that wrong, Kojo. Organizers with the African and African American Resistance Organization at Harvard. Amari, Kojo, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
Happy to be here.
Well, really happy to have you guys here. And I guess, you know, well, I'll start with you, Amari, but I'm curious both your thoughts about this. You're there at Harvard. Claudine Gay has stepped down. She's resigned. She was the president of Harvard. Now, of course, she stepped down in the midst of this whole sort of plagiarism issue. Most people perceived it to not actually be about plagiarism, but about the congressional hearing where her appearance became very controversial. And, you know, there's also sort of this other discourse around whether or not she was basically like a quote unquote affirmative action hire. So I guess it's a tough tough question to answer, but especially as, you know, Black students on campus organizing around progressive issues, I mean, you know, how are all these things colliding? Because on the one hand, you've got a president who didn't seem that supportive of Palestine, but on the other hand, you have this, you know, obviously racist attack against her. Anyway, I'll stop editorializing. Amari, I'll start with you, but I'm curious both your thoughts about this.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right, Eugene. I mean, it's very obvious that these attacks were never about plagiarism, never about Claudine Gay's academic integrity. And to be frank, I mean, the attacks on her were largely racist and anti-Black, and largely were part of a campaign by the ultra-right to kind of fight back against critical race theory or DEI initiatives, or just to completely rewrite the narrative of the United States and the history of the United States. This was largely just blatantly an anti-Black campaign in a white supremacist manner on Claudine Gay and on academia as a whole. And we definitely wholeheartedly, Afro and just us as individuals, we wholeheartedly condemn the racism that are fueling these attacks and the anti-Black sentiment that is along with these attacks. I mean, just by all means, like, it's completely disgusting. It has been completely disgusting. And we know this considering the fact that we have been, as Afro members, as Black organizers on campus, we have also been on the receiving end as a lot of these racist attacks. So we can sympathize with that, and we can sympathize with the anti-Blacks, with just how disgusting the anti-Black rhetoric has been throughout this entire campaign. But as you mentioned, there is another prong to it. And we acknowledged in a statement that Afro released recently that, yes, a lot of these attacks are being fueled by anti-Blackness and by these ultra-right white supremacist attacks. But largely, the reason why Claudine Gay was forced to resign is not solely because she's Black and because she's a Black woman, because she's the first Black woman president of Harvard, but largely because of part of this Zionist ultra-right national campaign to kind of silence the pro-Palestine movement. I mean, Claudine Gay, we've seen, has been, in our experience, quite ruthless with us. But to the ultra-right and to these CEOs and to these Zionists all throughout the country and world, she didn't go far enough. I mean, during the congressional hearing, Congress people were asking her, why haven't you expelled the students, including Kojo and myself and the other students on campus and all throughout the country who have been advocating for Palestine, right? Like, and we can say, Kojo and I can say, we are both actually currently facing disciplinary hearings, but even that is not enough for these ultra-right and these Zionists, because they're scared of how big our movement has grown and really exploded in the last couple of months. And they really are ready to kind of throw down the hammer. And Claudine Gay, although she tried her best, it wasn't enough to even save her. So I'll start with that.
Did you want to add anything, Kojo, before?
Oh, yeah,
No?
yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Amari got
you
it
wanna add
completely
something.
right. No, exactly. Yeah. And like, we understand that this is an institution, right? And the institution as a whole, the right wing is pressuring, and the institution as a whole is Zionist in their orientation, right? They have investments in Israeli apartheid. They have an interest in maintaining genocide of Palestinians. And so they're going to do whatever it takes in order to protect that, and in order to squash student resistance to that, and student organizing and student protests against that. And so, yeah, we understand it's the institution as a whole, and really the U.S. Rich and powerful, like Bill Ackman, who are fueling these attacks and trying to repress our movement.
Well, you know, that's actually something I wanted to raise, because I think there's so many things, like so many different angles, so many different elements that are brought together in this particular episode or attack by these right-wing forces, combined with like Zionists, combined with the you know, just people throwing their money around because of the privatization of education. I think that's a really interesting angle to this, is that this billionaire, Bill Ackman, really led this campaign, threw his money around to bully people. And if I'm not mistaken, it wasn't just at Harvard, but Harvard is where it was successful, probably because the president was a Black woman. Actually, no, there was another president, I can't who ended up resigning. Thank you. So she was a white woman. I apologize. But the point is that this also speaks to the really corporate takeover and the big money takeover of higher education in the United States. So I'm just curious if you could speak a bit to that, because it's quite concerning. You also have these people like Bill Ackman and others saying, you know, using their money and throwing around their influence to say, don't hire these students after they graduate.
Yeah, I can start. I think no, I can start. It definitely is a pretty profound point. I think it's definitely nothing new. I mean, Harvard, even when it refers to itself in emails, it's not Harvard University, it's largely the Harvard Corporation. The Harvard Corporation is like the oldest business in American history, really. And these interests in the email they sent to us, kind of that I think that Claudine wrote, kind of announcing her resignation, she admitted it was through the consultation of the corporation, of the Harvard Corporation. And it's a bit ironic to me, actually. It's almost comical that Bill Ackman is kind of just being so accusatory and inflammatory towards ex-President Gay and the corporation, considering the fact that these are largely a lot of his coworkers. Like, they all represent kind of the same group of big money interests and whatnot, and now they're all kind of fighting against each other for not going far enough. And we know that the corporation in and of itself is Zionist as well and represents these Zionist interests, considering the fact that they have been kind of buckling down on us for the past couple months. But we're kind of seeing kind of these different rifts even within the Zionist movement, where some are concerned that it's not going far enough and want it to go even farther. But I think at the end, it is very obvious that it's all kind of this big money, to your point, that it's really these corporate interests. And it's not a new phenomenon, because, I mean, as long as I've been here, it's always been the Harvard Corporation. But it's just interesting now to see kind of these different sects within there kind of trying to just scalp even further. So,
Yeah. And just like to briefly add on, like, I was literally talking with someone earlier today, and I was like, it feels like education is a side hustle for Harvard. Like, they have so many interests outside of like actually educating people that, and like really their role is to maintain, I mean, part of it is to maintain US hegemony, right? And to maintain this white supremacist system. That's the role that higher education has played now, right? And maintaining the rich and powerful. And so they're going to do whatever it takes to do that. And so, yeah, at this point, education is not one of their priorities, to be honest.
I think that's a great point. I wish I could remember who said this, but someone said this a few years ago, that Ivy League schools now are just like hedge funds with a university attached. And I think there's a certain truth to that. And a lot of the major public universities are just big hospitals, you know, with universities attached. But, you know, on that note, and maybe Kojo, I'll start with you, but of course would be happy to hear from both of you. It also speaks to something I think is important, because, you know, these institutions, obviously, as you all pointed out very well, represent, you know, the top 0.1%, like the richest of the corporate and financial elite, so on and so forth. And that's the thing that I find so interesting about the issue around DEI and how that's been raised, because I mean, you know, it's like the way these Republicans talk about it, or these other right-wingers, you'd think Harvard was like the Black Panther Party or something like that. And that, you know, they're pushing the most radical Black liberation agenda possible. And I was hoping you could just speak to that, because maybe this is not the case at Harvard, and if it's not, please tell me I'm wrong. But I find a lot of times at universities, at corporations, you know, a lot of these sort of policies and procedures and this, that, and the third is really just designed to create enough cover to say you're doing something while maintaining a very significant, you know, traditional, you know, status quo that, to say the least, is not liberatory for Black people here in the United States.
Bro, you hit the nail on the head with that. I mean, that's part of the reason why we even founded Afro, right? Because we have an understanding that the university is not with us, even with all these initiatives, you know, with all these policies. The university is not, you know, for Black folks, right? Even because we come out of a swatting incident that took place, where four of our peers, all Black dorm of four of our peers was swatted by the police, Harvard police. That's really the origins of Afro. That happened spring semester 2023. And so you're completely right. People think that DEI is some sort of like liberatory policy somehow, but it's not at the end of the day. And a lot of the policy of the university, like you're saying, is a way to obfuscate and abstract, as a way to just like point to a certain position or a certain policy to say, oh yeah, work is being done. But we've sat in those meetings with DEI officers. We've sat in those meetings with admin. The admin's true purpose is to derail student organizing, and for students to go to that and use that as a tactic to not create change. To say, oh yeah, we're working on this. Oh yeah, we're gonna create this committee. We always talk about committees about this is the start of a conversation, right? All these things are just tactics to get away from like the material issues that we face on campus. And so I think that framing is absolutely correct, right? We produce our own change. Like the students at Harvard, are gonna produce the actual change that we desire through organizing. But yeah.
I am also curious. I mean, and that's really important. I have been impressed with how active students have been, and I mean, you're up against so much too, and risking a lot. And it's not easy. I know it's not easy, especially when you've got these people, writing op-eds for like the Wall Street Journal being like, don't hire my students. I mean, I can't remember. I think it was a Berkeley professor that did that when this genocide started. But, I'm curious, for any students who are watching, who want to get involved, I actually know a couple who aren't at Harvard, but are at Ivy League institutions, and they just feel really isolated and they don't know what to do, and they're scared for their futures, and they're scared someone might find out they're getting involved. What's your message to people like that who are watching this happen and feel really alone and aren't really sure where to start and are kind of scared of the repercussions based on what they've been seeing in media?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think that just generally in response to Claudine Gay's forced resignation, for a lot of students, and especially Black students largely, is kind of put them kind of in a moment of pessimism where they feel like, wow, like if they're doing this to Claudine, and they can recognize that Claudine Gay herself isn't even pro-Palestine, and they're doing this to her. Like, what does that mean for us? What does this mean for the movement? And I mean, it's very sad to see. And we kind of sympathize with that notion, obviously, just that the attacks on her have been really horrendous and racist. But we urge folks to consider that if now especially is a moment to have courage, and the moment to prove that it was never going to be one president or one individual or one person that was going to change the movement or really change the course of history. And historically, we've seen it's always the people, it's always the masses of people in our thousands and our millions and our billions that we make history and that we change the world. And right now, we definitely see a lot that could and can be changed about the world, and that necessitates a huge global movement. And that starts for students on our campuses largely. I mean, a lot of the biggest movements in world history and in U.S. history especially have started on campuses just like ours. Harvard, other Ivy Leagues, and just other colleges all throughout the country, the biggest movements in the country have started there. And I think for me, that really has kind of inspired me to take this as a call to action and to feel optimism in this moment and hope that we the people make change. And I think for me, one framing that has really helped a lot is kind of to understand that the reason why we're facing all of this backlash and the reason why they're forced to kind of resort to these gross and disgusting scare tactics and intimidation campaigns is because we're doing our job. Like, we're making change, we're being loud, and that's getting to them. They're scared of us, essentially. And I think that we need to kind of take that as a testament that our organizing is working. But what we need more is further organization, and we get that from people not just mobilizing, but people continue to show up and joining the organization and continue to get involved on a deeper level. And we're seeing kind of a greater interest in that now, even with the kind of the repression that we've been facing and the increased repression efforts. And I think that means we just need to kind of double down on our organization. And now more than ever is the time to get involved. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, Amari and Kojo with the African and African American Resistance Organization at Harvard University, we really appreciate you coming and helping us sort through all this, giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Well, I love to see it. I love to see young people, getting involved in this kind of way. And it is, I mean, you're putting a lot on the line when you do that, especially when you're at such an elite institution. So good for them. They're awesome. More of that, please. You guys keep going.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I agree 100%. To some degree that the intimidation factor is the whole thing, right? I mean, you have the right to say what you want to say. You have the right to stand up and, speak your mind. But of course, if you are intimidated into doing it, you're basically losing the right. So they're hoping to scare people, and it can be scary. But yeah, there's nothing great I think that's ever been done without a lot of risk. So yeah, hats off to everyone around the country and the student movement who's continuing to stand up and push back. We are going to shift gears here now to Northeast Asia, where there are some very important issues that are being very poorly reported. That's for sure. And we are very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Joo-Hyun Park, who's a member of Notital and also the engagement editor at The Real News. Joo-Hyun, thank you so much for being back with us.
Eugene, Rania, great to see you as always. Thanks for having me.
Well, great to have you here, especially with some of what we've seen reported since the beginning of the year regarding the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea. I guess it was just after the New Year's Day. There were these huge blaring headlines all over the media that North Korea has given up on reunification and is no longer going to reunify. And of course, that's, also part and parcel of a broadly newly belligerent, I'm just sort of paraphrasing, but that kind of phrasing, posture by the DPRK. And, anyone who knows the issue, it's pretty shocking to think that they would make that kind of policy change. But I want to ask you first and foremost as our first question here, is that even a correct way to discuss what is actually happening on the Korean Peninsula?
The short answer is absolutely not. We saw a torrent of headlines from mainly English language media on New Year's Day and New Year's Eve claiming that the DPRK, per Kim Jong-un, had abandoned the cause of reunification with Korea. There was a very major important speech given by Kim Jong-un at the recent plenum of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea, which is sort of like a big summative meeting of everything that had happened that year. And it does have some very important ramifications for unification, but it does not mean that the DPRK has given up on that cause.
Well, the way it's been reported in the U.S. media, the headlines have all been pretty much like North Korea is basically like calling South Korea its principal enemy. That's what it's saying about Kim Jong-un as his rhetoric sharpens in a U.S. election year. That's the AP. I appreciate the fact that they're like, yeah, he's definitely doing this to try to influence the U.S. elections, like as if that that's the primary thing on his mind. I just, a couple more here, then there's a North Korea ramps up military rhetoric as Kim gives up on reunification with South. And it goes on and on and on. And then also, of course, in the media recently, when it comes to saber rattling against North Korea, there was a lot of anger from U.S. media outlets and also Australian media outlets, which isn't surprising, about North Korea selling some particular weapon to Russia because, apparently only the U.S. is allowed to sell weapons to its allies. But I'm just curious if you can speak to that sort of coverage and what they're getting wrong there.
Absolutely. I think what we need to do to begin is actually delve actual speech and what was said at the recent plenum late last year. Great to have you back, Eugene. So, as I said, Kim Jong-un delivered a really important speech at the recent plenum. And this was a very long speech that really summed up a lot of things that had happened throughout the year. It was not solely focused on reunification. However, there was a significant portion of it which was devoted to discussion of the international situation and what that means for how the DPRK will navigate its foreign relations going forward. So Kim Jong-un noted that last year was one of the worst years in North Korea's history in terms of aggression from the US. The situation has substantially changed from even just a few years ago due to the combination of the Biden and the Yoon administrations. One thing I think is particularly worth highlighting is that last year we saw one of the highest numbers of joint US-South Korea military exercises, otherwise known as war games, ever. There were more than 20 of these major large-scale war games occurring along with dozens of much smaller drills that took place throughout the year. We also saw some really important landmarks in terms of escalation from the United States, principally through the deployment of weaponry that we have not, in some cases, seen in Korea in a matter of decades. This includes the deployment of nuclear submarines on 2 occasions, the deployment of aircraft carriers equipped with B-52 bombers and other large bombers, which are capable as a fleet or a squadron of delivering really devastating destruction to any place that they target. And of course, we know that given North Korea's history of warfare with the United States and the devastating aerial campaign that occurred there during the Korean War, this is a particularly pointed threat to North Korea that they're not going to take lightly. So taking all of these facts into consideration, Kim Jong-un was delivering an assessment from the Workers' Party of Korea of the changed situation. He also noted that the United States is currently building a new security architecture in Northeast Asia, principally through a trilateral alliance with South Korea and Japan. We saw that being cemented or put in place earlier this year at Camp David, where the Washington Declaration was made. And we've also seen a lot of aggression from the South Korean government under current President Yoon Suk-yeol, who has declared the DPRK or North Korea as the principal enemy of the South. So we need to note that it is South Korea who made that step first. There's also some other things that have kind of escaped the attention of Western media. For instance, President Yoon told South Korean soldiers that should they perceive a threat coming from the north, they should shoot first and then make reports later. So he was essentially, in a very cavalier way, empowering soldiers to act outside of the chain of command based on their perception of threats, fully knowing, or perhaps not, depending on your assessment of this man's intelligence, that this can very easily trigger a much larger conflict with really devastating consequences for people in the peninsula and beyond. And lastly, as I've talked about on this program before, the Yoon administration has really pushed a policy of peace through strength, which includes stating that it has the right to preemptively strike the DPRK. So all of this is being taken into consideration by the Workers' Party of Korea, really seriously assessing what the actual conditions that they're facing currently are. And so there was an announcement made in terms of how their approach to reunification would probably change in the future. And one thing I want to note here is that the full details of this have not been disclosed. This is likely something that is going to be developed over a period of months, and that we will know about sometime later in the future when the government of North Korea is more prepared to deliver a more full statement. But what they were willing to say is that they no longer see South Korea as an equal partner in the reunification process. Kim Jong-un called the South Korean government, and I quote, a colonial stooge, and particularly highlighted the actions and the aggression of the Yoon government as a problem. And he noted that the reality of relations between North and South Korea right now is not a relationship between fraternal parties, but rather parties that are at war. And it's time for DPRK policy, North Korean policy, to reflect that reality as well. Now, a lot of interpretation around this saying that, oh, this is abandonment of reunification, I personally think comes from a lack of serious engagement with what is meant by reunification on the different sides. Part of what Kim Jong-un was rejecting was a formula for reunification that is kind of taken as common sense in the West, as well as among the more right-wing and conservative circles of South Korea, which goes by the name of reunification by absorption. Another way to phrase that is reunification by annexation. The idea that the South should simply annex the North, that it should depose the existing government, abolish the socialist system, and achieve reunification under a capitalist liberal order that is aligned with the United States. Now, the counter-proposal that has been in existence for decades from the northern side is the idea that the North and the South, the two governments of Korea, should engage in an independent, peaceful, and democratic process, always abiding by those three principles, of forming a single state that continues to have two systems, given that they recognize the reality that life and society and the structures of politics in the North and South are profoundly different. And that's not something that can be just wiped away and erased and then replaced by whatever someone wants overnight. It's going to be a generational process. And the only way to avoid a return to war would be to ensure that that is happening in a protracted way over time, with all parties committed to the process of reunification as being something that is peaceful, democratic, and beyond the influence of outside forces. So we don't really know where the DPRK will pivot from here in terms of its approach to reunification, but this is a major landmark change, because for the past generation and more, the DPRK has made serious attempts to engage with the government of the South as an equal partner, as someone that it needs to be in communication and coordination with to make reunification a reality. And now they are saying we can no longer trust the government that is in the South, and we must seek to achieve reunification by other means. What those means are right now, we do not know yet. But I do think it's important in this moment to realize that this is a major sea change. We are used to a media narrative that feeds us the idea that there is always crisis in Korea, that there are always threats coming from the North. And to some degree, it is true that, Korea has been in a suspended crisis for nearly a century in terms of the division of the country. However, this is also the end of a chapter that has lasted for about 30 years or more, in which North Korea made very serious attempts at rapprochement with the South, made very serious attempts to diplomatically engage the United States, made very serious attempts to find a path to peace through these means. And now they are declaring that after a generation of experience, that they realize that that path no longer has much viability under the current conditions that exist right now. And there have been many points of course correction where the United States and South Korea could have done things differently within, very recent history. When the Biden and the Yoon administrations were inaugurated, they could have sort of reset the relations that existed. After the DPRK declared itself a nuclear state in 2022, they could have realized that they're not going to get everything they want in terms of disarming North Korea, in terms of achieving regime change, and that realistically they needed to change their path. So when we think about how we got here and who's at fault, we need to lay the blame at the feet of the United States, South Korea, and Japan as well for being a participant in the Trilateral Alliance, and particularly with the governments that are currently in power, because there were so many points at which they could have done things differently and so many points at which they chose not to.
Well, I'm glad you made that point, because one of the, obviously we're here in the election year in the United States, and one of the factors that I think this perhaps will come up, Politico, others have been floating that President Trump is considering, if he was to be reelected, of renewing attempts to negotiate with the DPRK. Of course, you know, given Trump's broader sort of right-wing political trajectory, I think that maybe gives pause to some people who don't know much about the issue, but maybe progressive people. You know, what are some of the ways people you think, obviously it's a big question, but some of how people should view that, progressive people should view that going into this election cycle, where the discourse will very much be, you know, this is just Trump, you know, as pro-dictator and he wants to be with all dictators, as opposed to actually looking at the issues involved.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is a pretty clear attempt by Trump to sort of flank Biden on this issue. However, I think what really needs to be stressed here is that there is not a single major candidate that can be relied on to be an effective participant in a real process of Korean reunification and peace, who can look at that objectively in terms of what needs to be done. And that understanding needs to be built from the ground up. We need to have grassroots voices demanding the steps that need to be taken if we are going to have any serious possibility of the United States returning to the table successfully. The Trump administration did engage the government of North Korea during his previous administration. And as I've discussed on the show before, those efforts stalled because the national security interests of the United States were not overcome, because the prevailing logic of how to approach negotiations with North Korea, including within that administration, was that this is a surrender process where we get every single concession possible from North Korea and we give them nothing in return. And that sort of approach is always going to fail, as is the approach that was taken after those talks failed, and by the Biden administration in particular, of constantly moving up the escalation ladder in the hopes that maybe North Korea will be intimidated, or that there will be sufficient deterrence established from the United States side to sort of just prolong and suspend this process indefinitely. What we need is a real change in thinking. What we need is a real change in approach. The United States needs to recognize that reality is that North Korea is a nuclear state now. There is no putting that back in the box, right? That can't be undone. And the path to avoiding war is quite clear, has been clear for years. And it's to drop the sanctions, it's to stop the war games, and to seek normalized relations with North Korea. And the United States, under either of these, major party administrations, is going to try to sell it like it has no other choice. But we absolutely cannot let them get away with that, because every moment in which they choose escalation, every moment in which they choose false starts for diplomacy, where they are not serious about actually achieving a result, where North Korea is no longer isolated, no longer demonized and targeted by the United States and its allies, is them making the decision to continue down this path towards war, either through a more direct route or a more indirect route. So we need to have a lot of clarity from the ground in terms of what it's really going to take, so that we can project that vision in a way that doesn't rely on, either of these very powerful people within these very powerful established parties to sort of just act out of the benevolence of their heart.
Mm-hmm. Well, we really appreciate you helping us sort through all of these issues. Very important, very poorly reported here in the United States. Joo-hyun Park, a member of Noted Tall and engagement editor at The Real News, as always. Thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks again.
Rania?
All right. Thank you, Joo-hyun. And it's really just, I feel like I already knew this, but how horrible the corporate media in the U.S. is. But after Gaza, you just can't believe anything they say anymore about anything. I mean, that should be like a real revealing, point to a lot of people who maybe never quite absorbed it so well, that if they lie this much about Gaza, you better bet they're lying about China, about Venezuela, about Iran, and about North Korea.
Yeah. Yeah. Massively. I mean, massively. It's hard to even... it's hard to even know what to say, honestly, Rania, on this one, because there's almost no issue that's more demagogued than North Korea and so poorly understood, unfortunately, by so many Americans. But that's why it's good to have folks like Ju-hyun who can come reveal many important things that we need to know if we want to have more peace in Northeast Asia and the world more broadly. But now we want to turn our attention to another, what really is a major issue, but it's not being covered like a major issue in the U.S. South, specifically in Mississippi, more specifically in the Jackson, Mississippi area, Hinds County there. 215 bodies were found in unmarked graves there in Jackson, Mississippi. There's a lot to it. I wish it was being more reported, but nonetheless, we're very, very honored to be joined by the Reverend Kiana Jones, who's a community organizer in Atlanta, Georgia, to talk more about this. Reverend Jones, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always great to be with you on the freedom side.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us. And I get my first question for you in a way is, I hate to even say this, but I mean, were you surprised? I think everyone was shocked by the story, but were you surprised to see a story like this, 215 bodies, mainly poor people, buried in secret graves, essentially, in a state like Mississippi?
Honestly, no. I was not surprised to hear a story like this. We know our history here in the South. We know our history in the United States. And we know that unmarked graves are not uncommon anywhere in the United States because every state has a so-called pauper's grave. But what is surprising is that in Jackson, Mississippi, many of these people were not without family, were not without next of kin or a way to contact them. So these families were robbed of the right to put their loved ones away, to rest in their final peace properly and with dignity. And when you think about that, I think that really speaks to the larger overarching issue of dignity and who is seen as a person worthy of being recognized by humanity. We know that the majority of people buried in these paupers' graves from state to state are Black people. This sends us the message that Black people are not worthy of humanity, that we don't deserve dignity, that even in death, they want to rob us of every small bit of humanity that we have. And then you think about the people in those graves, like Dexter Wade, who were buried with identification. Dexter Wade had a state ID that listed his home address. Dexter Wade's mother had reported him missing since March. It wasn't revealed until later, many months later, that Dexter Wade was actually hit and run over by an off-duty police officer. This is egregious. This is not something that should be allowed to continue. And it really pains me that the leadership in Jackson, the leadership wants to gloss over this and talk about a failure in communication. And now, we're going to make sure that there's an alert system where people can be notified if their loved ones, happen to be at the coroner's office and nobody's there. Well, where was your alert system already? Is that not already part of your policy that you will seek the next of kin, that you will try to notify someone that their loved one is there in the coroner's office, that they are seeking to make final arrangements for these people? But what I find is a lot of song and dance, a lot of posturing, and a lot of glossing over the fact that there were over 200 unmarked graves. And look at where they are. At the prison. And these graves are so shallow that buzzards were flying around. You don't even give people enough respect to bury them in any type of coffin You're not embalming the bodies. You're just throwing body bags in the ground and covering them with dirt. What does that say about how you truly feel about the people who you're just throwing into these graves?
I just wanted to note, when you mentioned Dexter Wade, his mother told NBC News that she had hesitated. It took a lot for her to even call the police initially to report him missing, because her older brother was killed by police a few years earlier. And you mentioned, I mean, he was also killed by police and he had identification on him. And when I first saw this story, I saw, over 200 bodies found in unmarked graves. This must be like from 100 or 200 years ago or something. Like nobody knew there was this mass grave or something. And then I was just, I mean, even, that's horrifying enough, of course. But then to see that these are people who are just being killed in different ways, different Black people being killed in different ways, and just the police department, local authorities just don't care about notifying their families. And then they're having inmates. That's the other aspect of this story. I mean, you mentioned it a bit about this being behind a jail, but can you talk a bit about the people who were digging these graves and actually doing these burials?
Absolutely. Initially, when I heard the story, I myself almost dismissed it because I immediately assumed, these are inmates being buried here who they can't reach the next of kin. That was my assumption. I actually thought that in 2023, that would be the case. But when you think about a person that's already been sentenced to a life where they are not treated as human, where they have no dignity, to take that same person and put them into a position where they will have to dig a grave that might end up being their own fate. The trauma that people must be experiencing, the thoughts that must go through the minds of the inmates who are forced to do this labor. But could you imagine that some of those inmates might be coming across the bodies of people they know? What happens when you see your neighbor and you're digging a shallow grave and just throwing their body in there? What happens when it's someone you grew up with or a family friend? What happens? And then what happens to the quality of life of that inmate that's already caged, that's already being treated like less than human? What hope do they have? Because now they have images that they will never get out of their minds. An image that I'm sure they fear might someday be them.
I mean, it's horrifying to think about on just basically every single level, quite frankly. And I thought the point that you made about the leadership there, just sort of glossing it over, I felt, similar with the water crisis, all these different pieces. I mean, it really talks about, I think, another major issue here in the South that sort of, quite frankly, regardless of race, how poorly served the communities, especially working class Black communities, are by the political class. I mean, you're based in Atlanta. We've seen the Cop City debacle be pushed by these people. Obviously, we're mentioning Mississippi. We could go on and on to every state, but that really just feels like an important factor coming up here on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, this upcoming Monday, the national holiday, is how I don't even really know what to call them, but just how disappointing, so much of the, political class in many of these places that's supposed to be part of this, new democratic dispensation that we got after the civil rights movement, how disappointing a lot of that has turned out to be.
Absolutely disappointing. I commonly call them the Black misleadership class. What they are proving to us is you cannot stack the deck Black and think that institutions that were created on racism and that are sustained and driven by racialized capitalism are going to change simply because Black faces are running the system. Just because you put Black faces into the mix does not mean that that system is going to completely change from what it was designed to be. What we see, again, a mayor, Chokwe Lumumba, Black mayor, legacy, name recognition. People thought that this was the great Black hope. Here we are in Jackson, majority Black city council. I mean, we got the dream, right? we're going to be okay because we have Black people looking after other Black people. But we have to remember here in the South, particularly, the legacy of whipping boys, how there were Black people who oversaw other enslaved Black people. There were Black people who contributed to making sure that other enslaved Black people were caught by slave catchers. There were Black people. There has always been a Black misleadership class to throw us right out into the open where we can be ravaged by a system that was never meant to care for us, to promote us, to nurture us, or to give us any dignity. And it's really, really disappointing and extremely disheartening that particularly here in the South, this continues to perpetuate itself because we keep electing people just because they look like us. And I'm so tired of having to tell people that representation is not enough. And do you even represent me if you don't embody the same values, if you don't have the same political ideology, if you don't believe that every person is worthy of dignity and respect, if you believe that somehow a person's financial class should determine how well they are treated in this life, then you can't possibly represent me. And if you continue to make agreements with the white supremacist establishment just for a seat at their table and a place in this horrendous system, then you definitely can't represent me.
You know, I wanted to ask about if you could talk a bit about this other case out of Mississippi where there was an 11-year-old child shot and killed. Was he killed?
Just shot.
Okay, I'm sorry. Wow. Well, he was shot in his home by a police officer who was responding to a call. And that police officer who shot a child in his home, I just want to emphasize that. Shot a child in his home, reinstated, right? Reinstated after being suspended. Can you talk a bit about that case as well?
Here we are once again in Indianola. We have a full Black board of aldermen and mayor who reinstate a police officer who arrives at the home of young Adarian Murray when Adarian himself called the police. And forgive me if I get a little emotional on this one, y'all, because it hits close to home. Because my mother was a victim of domestic violence. And I remember calling the police more times than I can remember. And the times that they showed up, the way we were met by them, how we were treated, how my mother was criminalized even though she was the victim, and how, because of the treatment of these same officers, she was dehumanized even in death. So you have young Adarian Murray who calls the police because his mother's ex-boyfriend, who is known to be violent, shows up at the house, calls the police for help. I would venture to say that many young children these days still believe that 911 is the number that you call for help. They still believe that police are supposed to serve and protect. But when this officer showed up at the home of Adarian and his mother, the way he showed up was wrong from the beginning. The tone with which he spoke to them, he's just yelling, "Where is he? Come out. Everybody come out." I mean, Adarian, 11 years old, comes out with his hands up. Comes out with his hands up to show, hey, I'm innocent. I'm not doing anything. I'm complying. I'm listening because I trust you, officer. But that officer immediately shoots this 11-year-old boy, collapsing his lung, fracturing his ribs. I mean, lacerated liver. 11 years old. 11 years old. And all he could remember was blacking out and singing at some point. But at 11 years old, he now has stated in interviews that when he's alone and he's thinking, sometimes he just sees himself lying in a coffin. He sees himself dead. And what is that for an 11-year-old to look forward to or to have to be afraid of? But for the municipal government of Indianola to reinstate that officer You reinstate an officer who shot and has wounded an 11-year-old boy, who has permanently traumatized Adarian and his family. And I would venture to say a lot of other 11-year-old boys who look just like Adarian. But these are the type of people that you would have on your police force. And what we see is that whether it's in Indianola, whether it's in Atlanta, whether it's in Minneapolis, the life of a Black child doesn't seem to matter much. And it really hurts, because what this shows is that Black children are never seen as innocent, no matter what.
Couldn't say it better than that. Just 11 years, reinstate the guy. Let me not go on a rant. Well, as always, the Reverend Kiana Jones, community organizer from Atlanta, Georgia. Really appreciate you giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure.
I mean,
yeah,
2024.
Wild.
2024, and that's where we're at. I mean, it's really stunning, and it speaks to the immovability of the system that we live under. Like, it can't be at this point. Like, you can't reform your way out of a system that is structured to be this way. That literally functions off of being this way.
Yeah, I agree. And where's Joe Biden? I mean, I hate to say it like that, but he's giving these speeches, in Black churches, talking about he's for the civil rights movement, he's for the AME church, he's for this, he's for that. Where is he now? Nowhere to be seen, of course, no surprise. But Lord have mercy.
I'll tell you where he is. He's having a meeting with his Democratic operatives to make sure that they go on a campaign online to demonize people who are protesting his ongoing support for Israeli genocide in Gaza. That's what he's busy doing. He's busy giving weapons to Israel.
That's 100% for sure. And that'll be a good opportunity for us to transition here into talking more about where we are in the conflict here, the ongoing genocide in Palestine. And to your point, Rania, Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke today about the South African case against Israel in the International Court of Justice and said that it was standing in the way of important efforts to increase peace and security. And I just thought, already John Kirby's called it meritless, poorly timed, all these other things, but standing in the way, wow, amazing. But I say that just to say it shows how little is changing in this conflict, despite the fact, Israel is claiming they're in a new phase. And just a couple things I want to put out here for you, Rhonda, and then get your thoughts about this so-called new phase. And I just want to consult my notes here. Earlier this morning, I checked out what the Gaza Ministry of Health was reporting. And so this is from a little bit earlier today, but in the last 24 hours prior to whatever time that was, 11:30 a.m., but anyway, the 24 hours basically after the guy said that they were in a new phase, Israeli forces carried out 10 mass killings in Gaza, causing 112 deaths and 194 injuries. Now, that's several hours ago, so it could be worse. Also, Israel bombed the vicinity of the El Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir el-Bala. At least 8 people have been reported dead in the attack. Roughly 30,000 people, by the way, have been killed if you include the estimated 7,000 under the rubble. But just to give you a couple more, Rania, before I get your response here, an Israeli sniper shot dead a Palestinian woman whose grandson was holding a white flag as they attempted to flee from Gaza City to a quote-unquote safe zone. And at least 6 people were killed in an Israeli airstrike on an ambulance in the central Gaza Strip yesterday, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. Now, Israel, of course, is denying that, but, take that for what you will. But this is the new phase, Rania, 112 deaths in 24 hours.
I mean, look, everything that the Israelis and the Americans say, just assume the opposite is true. So when they say safe zones, they mean death zones. When they say evacuation zones, they mean that's where we're going to bomb. When they say that South Africa is standing in the way by charging Israel with genocide at the International Court of Justice, they actually mean, no, we're standing in the way. It's unbelievable. These people are professional liars. Yeah. Nothing that comes out of their mouth has any kernel of truth to it. Absolute junk and trash and garbage is what is coming out of the mouths of the people at the State Department and out of the Israeli government and all of their spokespeople. pure lies. This is an ongoing genocide. The U.S. is the one standing in the way of ending it, and as a result has created a culture of absolute impunity, where the Israelis know that they can commit 10 massacres in the course of a few hours, and that they can kill over 100 Palestinians. They've done it more, by the way. They've killed, at one point there was like 700 Palestinians killed in the course of 24 hours. So maybe that's what they mean by new phase, is that they're not killing 1,000 a day anymore. Now they're killing just a few hundred a day. That's where we're at, where those numbers start to sound low to some people. The amount of human suffering the Israelis have inflicted on Gaza is so astonishing. And I think what's astonishing about it is that it's being live streamed, and that all the evidence of the Israeli genocidal intent is right before our eyes, because they're saying it on video, they're saying it on camera, and speech after speech. And that is what was witnessed this morning for those who were able to watch the South African legal team give their argument at the ICJ for charging Israel with genocide. Is they had audio visual material that came from Israeli government officials and videos of Israeli soldiers committing, cheering and laughing like maniacally as they blow up buildings and kill people and kill civilians. The Israelis are still calling every hospital in Gaza a military base. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if the Israelis start claiming that they have to bomb The Hague because there's a Hamas headquarters based underneath it in a tunnel. Because the Israelis are actually making that argument, by the way, not to bomb it, but they're making the argument that that The Hague, that the South African legal team is actually working with Hamas. They said that is what we're hearing.
Legal arm of Hamas, which is amazing.
The legal arm. So all this new phase means is Israel has pulled its troops out because they don't want their troops die. They've pulled some units, some battalions out because they don't want troops dying, and they've lied. And you can talk more about this, Eugene, because you've been following the military movements far closer than I have. But we know that the Israelis have not achieved a single military victory. They can't hold any neighborhood in Gaza. They can certainly destroy it, carpet bomb it, get rid of all the residential housing, and kill people. They're really good at killing civilians, but they can't militarily hold a neighborhood without Hamas fighters still coming up from tunnels and attacking them, attacking their vehicles and attacking their soldiers. So they've had to retreat. So if anything, this is actually humiliating, I think, militarily for the Israelis. So the new phase is just sniping. It's the most cowardly stuff ever. It's sniping at people holding white flags. It's continuing to bomb hospitals and destroy every single standing building that serves some sort of medical capacity in any way. And continuing to try to force people in Gaza into smaller and smaller territory near the south so that they can create such a humanitarian catastrophe that the world will, they're hoping the world will start begging to allow Palestinians to leave so they can ethnically cleanse Gaza. And that's what we're seeing happen now. Palestinians are now dying of diseases. They're dying of famine. And that's going to get worse and worse. I encourage people to go watch the episode I did to medical doctor Anan Quzmar a few weeks ago, explaining the public health crisis that the Israelis have created in the south of Gaza by pushing everybody there into these small little zones of death. But yeah, that's my take on it, is that, this new phase, and this is what I think that the Israelis and the Americans are okay with this, by the way, want to continue to do what they're doing in Gaza without having to have so many soldiers actually in the strip until they've achieved the full removal of most people from what they want to create as a buffer zone in most of the north and central Gaza.
No, I think you're making a great point, and it's also notable about this issue of ethnic cleansing. Basil Smotrich, the finance minister, who is one of the most genocidal of them all, actually, when he was denouncing countries for supporting South Africa, he said, well, if they care so much about the Palestinians, they should just take them all in. They should open their doors and take them all in. So in the midst of the government being accused of an ethnic cleansing campaign to force out all Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank, here is the finance minister of the country basically being like, yeah, they should all get out of here, and all these other countries should open up their doors and take them. I mean, it really is brazen on a number of different levels. And to note on the hospital issue as well, the United Nations reporting today that there's only 1/5 of the needed emergency and trauma beds. So I guess the other way to look at that is 4/5 of all people with a serious injury are either just being treated on the floor somewhere, on the ground somewhere, or they're just not being treated at all. 4/5 of all people who have serious injuries. And of course, that should just give you a sense of the basically complete breakdown of the medical issue. But I think you're right, Rania, about America being happy with this. I mean, you look at the recent statement from Secretary of State Blinken, where he said, well, if we can resolve this with some sort of Palestinian statehood, we can isolate Iran. And I say all that just to say, I think it's clear to most people that the whole context of this Abraham Accords normalization situation from day one has been to help facilitate the pivot to Asia that the United States has been trying to carry out since President Obama, because now, they're going all in, pushing all the chips in on the table to try to, kneecap China, contain them, and so on and so forth in this new Cold War scenario. And of course, the very critical crossroads of the world in West Asia and North Africa is where so much U.S. military equipment is. So in order to pivot out of that, you have to make sure, if you're the United States and you feel you must maintain total hegemony over all regions of the world, but they do believe that, and it's in the National Defense Strategy that they put out. If you don't believe me, you can read that. But nonetheless, you have to have some enduring security structure. And obviously what the U.S. national security establishment has dreamed up is an alliance of Arab regimes and Israel that are basically against Iran, even if it's kind of a Cold War between this axis and Iran and the countries that are closer to Iran. At the very least, that'll sort of check the power of Iran, of Syria, of Yemen, of other non-state actors like Hezbollah and others who the U.S. feels they cannot control, and who themselves have said that even though they actually don't hate the U.S. and would like to work with the U.S., they keep trying to, that they will not be dictated to. So ultimately, the big stumbling block leading up to this was Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia's point was because of their own standing, they're telling the United States, well, we'll eviscerate our own reputation if we go forward with this. There has to be some form of resolution for the Palestinians or something like that. So my personal belief about this is that the United States from the beginning has actually seen this genocide as an opportunity, because on the one hand, they can, because they agree with Israel that the Palestinian resistance is the worst, thing that's ever out there, and they can more or less give them a deep, deep blow by going forward with this genocidal bombing and ground campaign. But on the same token, they know how rabid the Israelis are, and that their entire existence is predicated on U.S. support, and that'll be more difficult if there's bad PR, that they can then on the back end pressure the Israelis to create some sort of fake Bantustan style so-called two-state solution that isn't even that, but something that at least looks that way, so that they can facilitate the normalization process moving forward in the same way they engendered it, in order to isolate anyone in the West Asian region, North Africa region that they feel they cannot control. And that's exactly what Blinken's statements today are about, or I think it was today, in terms of, well, if we do this, we can isolate Iran. So you can see America is working in a multiple different ways here in a very malign way. But this idea that somehow they're against this genocide, or that they're the ones, I actually saw some idiot say, thank you, President Biden, for Israel's new phase or whatever. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So it's totally fake, and it's really, really sinister, I think, looking at the geopolitics of all of this, and how all of this is playing out, with hundreds of people still being killed, every day. On average, 250 a day, according to Oxfam.
It also speaks to a certain level of hubris by the Americans that is almost going to be their undoing in many ways, because like you mentioned about this idea of having this fake Palestinian state, this Bantustan. I mean, yeah, that's what the U.S. ultimately wants, but the Israeli government is so insane. They won't even agree to those things. No, we refuse to even allow that to take place. This fake state that wouldn't actually be a state that would benefit us so much, because we want it all, because they're just so far right and nuts. And they have these crazy genocidal ambitions, right? And they also, the Israelis, a certain faction of people in their government are insane enough to want a war, to want to open up the Lebanon front. And I'm sure some of them are thinking, oh yeah, we've pulled out battalions from Gaza, let's let them rest a little bit, and then we can go full force in Lebanon. And there is definitely, I think there is some daylight between what the U.S. wants and what this current Israeli government wants, and I think that this is kind of the split in the ruling class, if you will, right? Like the ruling class doesn't always agree about how best to go about these things. So the U.S., by letting Israel go all the way, I mean, what does that mean for the U.S.? It means the potential for Israel to not care what the U.S. tells them they can't do because they never use any leverage, and go full force and open up a front in Lebanon and make this a regional war, and that's going to pull the U.S. in because Israel can't take on Hezbollah alone. They don't have the capacity to. They would actually, just like they didn't have the capacity to take on Hamas in Gaza without an endless weapons flow every single day from America. It would be even more difficult for them to try to take on Hezbollah in Lebanon. The U.S. can't let its ally lose, right? So they'd have to get involved. So then what does that mean for the region? I mean, I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but it's amazing the U.S. is willing to risk that, because that is actually where the U.S. doesn't benefit. It goes against everything they've been trying to do, which is what you're saying, which is create the Abraham Accords and have this isolation of Iran, but in a Cold War way, which doesn't have to actually mean going to hot war with Iran. And this undermines all of that. So it's amazing to me. It's amazing how these idiots like Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, who are in charge of these policies, are just, I don't know, they're going to shoot themselves in the foot, possibly. I don't care I'm not trying to say I want imperialism to be successful. Just that, they, at this point, it's kind of like the role of the U.S. around the world at the moment. Overstretched, overly confident, actually weaker than they really are or think they are, and not able to control everything the way they want to.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, it's a tightrope, but it's sort of the illogic of their position is when you want to impose something on a whole region, on essentially 1 billion people that they do not want, it can only be done by taking sort of what seem to, I think, normal people, insane levels of risk. Because, like, why would you do this? But there's a certain insanity, I think, we have to also remember behind the entire sort of imperial project. The idea that you think that you can, it's not even the majority of Americans who control American policy. It's that this tiny group of people can just impose upon the world the things they're dreaming up in their think tanks and their, late nights drinking at the White House or whatever, that you can just do that. I think it's leading us to these great, very risky chasms here. But it is worth saying before we move on, because I know we have a guest that we're going to move to, but it is worth saying that they have huge thorns in their side, and that those thorns are the Yemenis, the Iraqis, the Lebanese, and the Palestinians. So, as long as they continue to try to impose themselves, there's going to be resistance to that. There's going to be armed resistance to that. And, I think that's the game changer this time around. This isn't Middle East of 2003. This is the Middle East of 2024, where there are forces across the region that are willing and capable of hitting back, and they'll do it, and they are doing it. And it's kind of incredible to watch, because I think this is the first time where the Israelis and the Americans have had to contend with some level of consequence for their insane aggression. Yeah. Well, let's move forward here. Today was the first day of first set of hearings, so to speak, at the International Court of Justice around South Africa's submission there, charging Israel with genocide. South Africa presented their case here today, January 11th. Israel will make some sort of response tomorrow, and then the process will continue moving forward. But we, to discuss all this and more, are very honored to be joined by Lamis Deek, who's an international attorney with Deek, Dichter, and Adi, and also with the Palestine Assembly for Liberation Commission on War Crimes. Lamis, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. It's an honor with both of you, Eugene and Rania, to see you direct on screen. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your magnificent work. I don't know if my internet connection is doing well, but you'll let me know. It's telling me here it's not stable, but we'll do our best. This is a really critical time and day, and I'm glad that you're giving it the time and gravity it really deserves. And I think it's a critical moment, not just in Palestinian history, which it really is, but in world history. And so I'm happy to be here with you to talk a little bit about this, and to hear from you as well.
Well, thank you so much. We can hear you loud and clear now, but we will let you know if anything changes. But I mean, one thing that I was hoping to ask you first is maybe it seems obvious, but why is South Africa's case here at the International Court of Justice so important? What does it? What can it accomplish?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the bigger picture, this is really a question of, or rather a test of the laws, the rule of law, and the systems and mechanisms that are intended to execute the laws, which are designed not just to protect human rights, but really to physically preserve humanity, its very self. So we're talking about the very right to exist as a people, as a part of humanity, is being tested. The mechanisms designed to make sure that this is of utmost importance to every state are being tested at the moment. So that's the big picture. And the question becomes, direct result of the ICJ finding is, are these laws and systems null, void, and racist, such that we have ushered in an era into abject barbarism, or can they be salvaged? And really, this is a monumentous test of this, a momentous test of this. On the Palestinian level, what this means is actually quite of the same magnitude, and it's never happened in the history of Palestine, which is, number one, looking at actually the overview, what is being requested. Today's argument was on the provisional measures and not necessarily the merits. And the provisional measures are asking that the ICJ order measures which will prevent and punish those who have engaged in genocide in Palestine. This is huge. First of all, what does that mean to say to prevent? This could then go to the UN Security Council, and I'll talk about the US, to authorize direct military action to stop Israel from continuing its genocide in Gaza, right? This, I understand that there's the question of the UNSC, the UN Security Council veto by the US, but this, as pursuant to several meetings we've had with governments, representing their government, with missions to the UN, this has been under discussion, and the UN Security Council being vetoed and completely stopped from implementing its mandate by the US veto has been under discussion. But even that aside authorization intervention by the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly is also entitled to take via resolutions and other ad hoc committees and ad hoc tribunals to take action, help stop and punish the genocide in Palestine. And ostensibly, that includes creating ad hoc tribunals, for example, that includes issuing warrants, for example, taking other actions as they can come up with creatively. But it also legitimizes, even if not directly, but indirectly legitimizes independent state action to that effect if the UN Security Council blocks it or it doesn't happen in the UN General Assembly. And quite frankly, based on our meetings and discussions with other governments, we believe that there is strong interest in being able to do something meaningful and effective, building up and out from the ICJ decision. The other thing that I think is really important is the monitoring mechanism that would be implemented, that should be implemented by way of the ICJ decision on the provisional measures. And this means that the pattern of stop to feed and kill again would really be brought to an end, because there has to be a monitoring and reporting for the duration of the ICJ case, the merits part of the case. And I would imagine long after that, ensuring that genocide is not being perpetuated in Palestine by the Zionist entity, which is huge, right? We haven't seen this happen previously. This has been the holding pattern for 75 years for sure, but for 17 years during the life of the siege. And then another point that I think is glossed over a bit, and I really want to highlight, is the prevention. And the prevention means that you can't incite and you can't give material support to genocide. And this matter of incitement is really important. We've been able to this has happened in direct and large part because of the discursive war that's been launched against Palestinians for the past 75 years, that's dehumanized us, that's criminalized us for simply asking for our right to be free from subjugation, from massacres and apartheid. And in comes the South African government to say, well, this has got to end, and hopefully the ICJ will reiterate that in its findings, that this has got to end. And this is a tremendous, I think, game changer for how mainstream media, Western media, is mobilized and mobilizing violence, colonization, genocide, wars around Palestinians, but also brings in a layer of liability. And from our end, as attorneys preparing to really give life to this, and sometimes having to advise governments on how they can be prepared to give what happens legs, good or bad, right? Whether we get a decision which is it's likely, or we don't get the decision, which I think is unlikely, that there are things that can be done quite effectively and tangibly to really make a mark and bring a stop to this genocide. And the question is how long it will take, and that largely depends on what the US will do in the Security Council after that decision is rendered.
It's all so important, and I'm so happy you raised all of that. And I wanted to ask, I think it's incredible. Nearly 1,000 civil society organizations declared their support for South Africa's efforts at the ICJ. Why was it so important to organize a broad civil society effort like that?
Yeah, so I have to say I'm very happy to be a member of, as the PAL Commission on War Crimes, of the International Coalition to Stop Genocide in Palestine. I was not the convener coalition, and they've done an amazing job. It is through the pressure of civil society, and in the past few days in particular, as we've been escalating and kind of working to prepare hopefully state actors to kind of get their eggs in order to intervene eventually on this case. It's really been the bigger unions, the bigger elements of civil society in each of these countries that is making the fuss and the ruckus and amplifying their demands directly to their government, saying, we need you to issue this letter. And we've seen it happen, an almost immediate response, whether it was, a massive union or element of civil society signing and delivering petitions to their governments, and then getting letters, the next day, or our meetings letters the next day. And the letters are the preliminary notice that basically governments are giving to the ICJ. And this is something that we really wanted to underscore, is that these are not abstractions. These are not distant mechanisms. These are mechanisms intended to serve and protect the whole of humanity. And therefore, the whole of humanity has a role to play in ensuring that these measures are taken, that these systems and institutions are protected for their own lives, for their own nations, for their own people. And I think when people also understand their power and that they have a role in this, it gives them a sense of, oh, okay, I have a tool and I have a direct role I can play, and they're watching this, and it's just been spiraling. So it's been magnificent to see that, and I give a great deal of gratitude to the coalition who've really helped all of this along, and really directly helped our commission and our work along vis-a-vis these governments. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. one of these issues, maybe it shouldn't be surprising that they did this, but the U.S., of course, has stated that the South African case is baseless. I think they also said it was without merit. Anthony Blinken said today that, amazingly, that it's actually blocking the efforts for peace. So, that's certainly the U.S. take on it. But I wonder what you think that says about the U.S. government, because they're so constantly moralizing around human rights. And then here we are with this to me, very clear case. And it's one thing to be against it, but to call it baseless, meritless, I don't know. Anyway, let me leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I was really excited and hoping you'd ask this question, Eugene. So we've been preparing these primers, my office and the PAL Commission, these primers and these drafts. I think, thank you for covering yesterday's short press conference on this. And one of the things I put as a sample, because the rest of the issues that would be in contention about and for which third states would intervene haven't been raised yet. So we used actually the example of the US's very own declaration of intervention on the ICJ case of Ukraine versus the Russian Federation, in which they take this very strong position in support of the application of the Genocide Convention in the case of Ukraine versus Russia. And, I think one of the most remarkable statements made today by the South African legal team was that this is a frighteningly unprecedented genocide that we're watching, and facts that really have not been seen in modern history, and quite frankly, before the Zionists are doing the daily murder by upward of 70 Palestinians a day than the Nazis did. And so it really is frighteningly unprecedented. So it underscores not only the contradiction of the United States and its written filings on this issue, especially before the ICJ, but it really exposes the visceral racism that this country and the West has towards Palestinians, towards Arabs, towards Muslims, which we've seen over the course of the past 20 years, beginning with the invasion and the slaughter of Iraqis, but now coming to this really unfathomable level of violence. And it underscores their visceral investment in the Zionist entity and their dedication to their role as imperialists, as violent, barbaric imperialists, their role in holding back human and moral progress. And I think this really would be one of the nails in the coffin of not only U.S. standing globally, but you as political and financial power in the world. So it's fine if they choose to shoot their own foot. Sometimes their arrogance works in our favor. It'll be a question of how that impacts the UN Security Council. I am hopeful that there will be measures taken to limit the US's ability to veto or to circumvent that. But yeah, that's my stance on those statements. It will be the U.S. that will be rendered meritless and baseless if they decide to intervene on papers on the side of Israel. Yeah,
full circle.
I love that. Rania.
It also seems like there is this, historic element to this coming specifically from South Africa. I mean, a lot of this is so moving because of that. This is a country that has defeated apartheid, that also an apartheid government that was supported, I should say, by the U.S. and the Israelis. And that government had very strong ties to Israel. There's a whole history behind that. And now this country that liberated itself from this disgusting white supremacist apartheid government is the one that is taking on Israel. And I'm curious if you can offer some reflections on that very moving aspect of this.
I think that you stated it perfectly, Rania, which is it is so deeply moving. I mean, it's hair-raisingly beautiful. And I think that's one of the important lessons in all of this, that it is oppressed people who are always on the front line, because nobody understands oppression, whether it's physically, logically, even legally or discursively, as oppressed people do and have. And South Africa is, on top of having survived and defeated all this, South Africa is in struggle today. Right. And we are taking lessons from the South African government. The whole world is taking lessons from the South African government of what to do well and what to do better. We saw last night in Ramallah, in Nelson Mandela Square, Palestinians really rallying. And that was so touching and so moving. I think to us and to our South African colleagues and comrades whom we're in regular contact with. And I want to bring back a little bit about the role, if it's okay, Rania, about the role of oppressed people in this, and talk about the alliance that we convened in Geneva, and our coordination with South African legal forces and organizing forces. One of the things that happened coming out of Geneva was the formation of the Global Legal Alliance for Palestine. And it's really this impressive convening of some of the heroes of the international lawyering world, but it's different in two primary ways. Number one, it goes beyond, which is something I've been advocating for since 2014, by the way, on the record at high level meetings, which is, guys, we really have to go beyond international humanitarian laws and forums and really look at the commercial, look at the local, the regulatory, look at creating alternative, multi-state tribunals, and look at the commercial. So it's not just international humanitarian lawyers, but it's also international private lawyers. My practice is both those worlds, but we were able to bring in more and really look at also legislating. One line I like to say, and forgive me, I know there's going to be a lot of probably opinions on this, is they like sanctions, we like them too. They like terrorism, we like them too, right? So, we're moving in that direction. But then the other thing, to bring it back to South Africa, is this is the first global legal initiative, and I would say even respectfully domestic legal or national legal initiative that runs fully under the auspices of Palestinian self-determination, Palestinian-led. All of the demands, Palestinian popular will, coming into the legal domain in a way that we have never seen. And that's incredibly important and empowering, and really changes the flavor and the nature of legal actions, which have often happened for and on behalf of, and sometimes have problematic dicta, if not results. And so I think, taking this lesson of South Africa and really positioning Palestinians themselves, and not just the lawyers, but certainly the lawyers, but the researchers, the human rights workers, the survivors in Gaza, prioritizing them is legally powerful, not just politically powerful.
Mm-hmm. Lamis Deek of Deek, Dictor, and Adi, as well as the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation Commission on War Crimes. Really, really was honored to have you here to help us sort through all of this, and we'll be looking forward to having you back as it continues to move forward.
It's my deepest honor to be with both of you and to see you. Eugene, I get to see you in New York, but I'm so excited to have been one-on-one with you, Rania, and I hope I get to see you soon. Thank you both for all of your work.
Right on. Thank you so much.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Yeah, she's wonderful. Lamis is wonderful, and she's been on it. She's been on it, consistently been on it. And so, appreciate all those people who've been consistently on it.
Consistently on it for, some time. I won't, people always this way. Anyway, I first started to get involved around the time of the Second Intifada, and I've been seeing Lamis since I came into activism around Palestine. That level of consistency is deeply, deeply appreciated. So we thank her so much for being willing to join us, and we'll continue to see how this continues to play out. Obviously, as I said, tomorrow there will be the Israeli, I don't even want to call it defense. I don't know what they're going to say. I'll also note that the submission Mission by South Africa is available on UNTV. I actually think the People's Forum is going to have something on their YouTube. They'll hold the whole thing up maybe later this evening. So please, I think, go back, watch it, check it out. Very, very interesting submissions by all the various different lawyers and South African government officials. Well worth your time, as well as the 84-page document. But Rania, one thing I want to note here, because we started at the beginning of the show saying that people should definitely hit the subscribe button here on YouTube and then hit the bell to get the things they subscribe to, including, as I always say, Dispatches with Rania Khalek. But as soon as this show is over here tonight, Rania, we're going to be releasing your most recent episode of Dispatches.
Actually, it's going to be tomorrow morning. Hold on, I need to update you on that. It's actually going to be tomorrow morning.
Well, why did people not update me before we go on air?
Yeah.
I want the audience to note this, that I was given the incorrect information by the Breakthrough News team. That's what I want to be
just
noted.
received. Look, I can't. It's multitasking when you're on air is difficult.
Y'all see how they do me now. You see how they do me. Just remember.
There is a really good episode of my show coming out tomorrow morning. Please keep your eye out for the next episode of Dispatches. It's with should I say who it's with?
I think you, at this point, I think you might as well say who it is, or people will just think we're crazy or something.
It's not your fault. Hold on. I love this this lower third that I assume Matt put in there, that the BT team says it's not your fault. It's not our fault. It's true. It's not our fault, unless sometimes it's Eugene's fault, but otherwise not our fault.
Wow. Please tell us who your guest was.
So tomorrow, I will be releasing an interview I did with the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese. She's incredible, wonderful. She's been very vocal, and it was a fantastic interview. She breaks down some of the legal aspects around the fact that Israel does not, in fact, by the way, have a right to defend itself against the people it occupies. That's not how international law works. It doesn't actually have that right that we hear 24/7. Palestinians are the ones who actually have a right to defend themselves. But beyond that, it was a fantastic conversation. So keep your eye out for that Friday morning Eastern time, New York time. And I also just want to watch Dispatches with Rania. Indeed. Thank you, Matt. Thank you. I also just want to reiterate to those who are watching that please do, if you are able to, support our content here at Breakthrough News. Independent media is more important than ever. You can do that by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News and becoming a member, where you can get access to exclusive content. And then also, if you are watching, please do make sure that you have liked the show. The more likes it has, the better we do in the algorithm, because we are all slaves to the algorithm in 2024. So anyways, Eugene, you always have the best last words, so I'll leave it there.
Well, those were great last words. I'll also just note quickly that you interviewed maybe about a month ago on Dispatches Craig Mokhiber, the UN official who resigned over genocide, which I think is also very, very relevant to the court case at the ICJ and many of the things he laid out there about genocide. So 2 fantastic episodes, including one coming tomorrow morning. But I think you laid it out very well there, Rania. We would like to thank, of course, all of our guests, everyone who is there in the chat, everyone watching in any type of way, of course, everyone working behind the scenes here at Breakthrough News. And we'll continue to push forward and follow all of these really important stories. We'll be back with you, of course, next week with more on how this case is turning out at the ICJ, what's happening in Palestine in general, and many other important stories from the United States and every other corner of the globe. So for myself, for Rania Khalek, we will see you next time.
Revolution now.